Welcome to Lecture 2 of Scheffler's Death and the Afterlife. Chapter 2 begins with Scheffler formulating three theses. The first of these is that what matters to us depends on our confidence in the existence of the afterlife. The second thesis is that what matters, period, depends on the existence of the afterlife. And the third is that what matters to us depends on the existence of the afterlife. These are three very different theses, so to get clear about them, it's useful to look at how you might defend them. One way to test the first hypothesis, that what matters to you depends on your confidence in the existence of the afterlife, is to consider what would happen if you were to lose confidence in the existence of the afterlife, and see how things would change in terms of what matters to you. But one way to look at this particular hypothesis is to consider that you falsely believe that there will be no afterlife. That is, you get some information that's very pessimistic. Say, for instance, climate change means that in 50 years humans will be extinct. You genuinely believe that, but it turns out that certain things are underway that will actually save the Earth. But as you walk around falsely believing that there will be no afterlife, how would what matters to you change in that circumstance? Second hypothesis, that what matters depends on the existence of the afterlife. Well, what matters and what matters to you are two distinct concepts. And generally, I think that Americans tend to be very skeptical about the notion that there are things that just matter, period. If you were to ask people in this country, Americans of all shapes and colors, I think that you're much likelier than in other countries to think, oh, what matters is subjective. It's what matters to you, what's important to you or valuable to you. There's really no such thing as just what matters, period. If you ask sociologists or anthropologists why this is true in America, but much less true in, say, Japan, Korea, or many African cultures, one answer you get is the highly individualistic culture surrounding American life. Rugged selves, don't tread on me, I do what I want. It's a collective individualism that borders on narcissism. But another explanation you might hear is that Americans, being an immigrant and pluralistic nation of peoples, with very different religions, ethnic identities, and conceptions of worthwhile lives, are very justifiably skeptical that there are universal conceptions of what's important and valuable. And in the spirit of tolerance and trying to live together, we don't even try to adjudicate anything of the kind that some things just matter. Maybe we don't want to offend or impose on each other. But I think in a philosophy class, we can challenge all of these presumptions. Let's take an example. Certain things matter to Colin Kaepernick. The disproportionate violence that it's inflicted on African Americans by police in this country. That's something that matters to him, is important to him. And in recent months, it's mattered to a lot more people than it did 6 years ago. So here we have something that matters to him. Maybe it matters to you too. Maybe it matters to me. But it certainly doesn't matter to a lot of other Americans. And the question arises, does something like this just matter? It matters regardless of who it matters to. If there is a kind of injustice like this, it's a thing that just matters, period. Scheffler thinks so. A lot of philosophers also think so, that there is such a thing as things that just matter, independently of whether it matters to you or other people. One way to defend the idea that there are things that just matter, in addition to just mattering to you, is to do it with our familiar friend, the Euthyphro question. One way to argue is to think that it would continue to matter, even if it stopped mattering to you. And you might want to ask yourself, when something you think matters, and it also matters to you, Does it matter to you because it matters? Or does it matter because it matters to you? That familiar Euthyphro question, I think, for a lot of things that I care about, I seem to want to answer this way. It matters to me because it matters. It ought to matter to everyone else too. And if it doesn't matter to them, then they're mistaken. Some values work this way. Not everything. Knowing the trivia of arbitrary 90s music matters to me. But I don't think it actually matters all that much, even though it does matter to me. The case of police violence is quite different from that. That does matter to me, and it also matters. And it matters to me because it matters. So, in answering the question, is there such a thing as just what matters? I think we can motivate an argument that there is such a thing. So, given that there is such a thing, does what matters depend on the existence of the afterlife? Well, to figure out whether that's true, consider the circumstance where we are uninformed about the existence of the afterlife. We think that it will exist, but in actuality it doesn't. Or alternatively, we can consider us being very confident in the afterlife, but doomsday is in fact near. Consider all the things that other people do that matter. Would it turn out not to matter after all if people were confident in the afterlife, but it turns out doomsday was very near? For example, some people think reforming the Electoral College is something that matters, even if it doesn't matter to a whole host of other people. Unbeknownst to everyone, though, a year from the next election, the human race is going to be destroyed anyways. So there's something that matters to people because they're confident in the existence of the afterlife. But it turns out they shouldn't be that confident. The world's going to end. Is reforming the Electoral College still something that matters? When I think about this particular kind of hypothetical, my answer is no, it actually doesn't matter. The very fact that humanity is going to disappear within a year, and people don't know that, means that a lot of people are just wasting their time trying to reform the Electoral College. Yes, it matters to them. It gives them some value in their own activities, but it's actually valueless. It's a waste of time. If there's anything like that, then some of the things that matter depend on the existence of the afterlife, regardless of your confidence, true or false, in the existence of the afterlife. Hypothesis 3, that what matters to us depends on the existence of the afterlife. Right? And this is about those things that matter to us only. For instance, knowing 90s trivia about 90s music. To test this hypothesis, consider that you have a true belief in the afterlife. And find something that matters to you in that context. So for instance, the world is going to exist after I die, and that's why I make podcasts, say. Now consider that you find out that doomsday is actually near. It turns out that humans will go extinct shortly after your own death. And God gives you one of two choices. You can take a drug that will make you think there's an afterlife. And given that you think that, you're going to keep making podcasts for people to listen to. Or God can make it so that there is an afterlife. Scheffler's thought experiment here is supposed to tease out the following. Whether or not it's meaningful for me to make podcasts depends on whether or not people actually exist, not just on whether I think that they're going to exist. I don't want to just think that people are going to exist. I want them to actually exist, to give what I'm doing some kind of significance to me. Scheffler thinks that all three of these theses are true. He thinks that when we start reflecting on the doomsday scenario, there are many things of our values, things that we value ourselves, and things that we think are just valuable, period. They're valuable to everyone, for everyone. Depend on the existence of the afterlife, depend on our confidence in the afterlife, and so forth. And then there's a very interesting interlude in which Scheffler talks about games. Games pose an interesting problem for Scheffler. In fact, the puzzles that Scheffler raises about games is interesting in its own right. We're talking about games where the individuals who are playing don't get some extra reward that we normally don't get. So for instance, professional players who make a lot of money, or people who play games online and get paid for it, and so forth. We're not talking about champion players. We're just talking about run-of-the-mill, getting friends together, playing a board game, playing charades, something to that effect. The interesting thing about games is that lots of things are very important. Getting the amulet, beating the next boss, owning all of the properties, and so forth. Games have this feature where there are these artificially difficult barriers we put down. And then when we overcome those barriers, we find a lot of enjoyment in them. After the game is over, we're done, and then we move on. Playing games doesn't appear to depend on our confidence or existence in the afterlife. In fact, if you're really entrenched in playing a game, you don't think much about what happens afterwards. People enjoy and are passionate about the games that they play. But all of the significance that we put on games is a pretense. There's nothing intrinsically valuable to us about owning all of the blue properties in Monopoly. Some people put a lot of their self-worth in how good of a game player they are. But the typical game player overcomes certain obstacles and within the fantasy values many things, but don't value them afterward. And then the question is, why do people do this? Because the answer to that question might solve a lot of the problems that Scheffler is proposing in a way that's inconsistent with what he's trying to argue. For instance, what if life were just like a game? What if, as a matter of fact, the reason why human beings do what they do is that they pretend that everything has significance, just like they pretend in a game that things are important, like owning Broadway and Park Place? What if it turns out that human beings walk around just pretending that the things that they value, they value? It's an interesting consideration. So if we ask the question, why do people play games? Scheffler proposes two different answers to that. Maybe game playing seems meaningful as an escape. The very fact that life is so full of things that are important and matter to you, it's incredibly stressful and full of pressure, especially when you're young like you are. Playing a game is a way to put artificial significance on things, as a way to escape. You know that the game is, in fact, insignificant and meaningless. And if that were true, then it's no threat to Scheffler's view here. It's no threat to any of his three theses. On the other hand, game playing might be meaningful because it takes place in a context of a meaningless life. Maybe you implicitly recognize that nothing in life actually matters. And so playing games is a way for you to practice as though things matter, so that you can live a life under the same pretenses. That's a rather depressing way to look at things, but it's an open possibility. Thinking about whether life is a game or why we play games is a very good podcast episode that you might want to do with your team. What are the lessons from the three theses? Scheffler thinks the lessons are that valuing, being important, mattering, is not individualistic. Valuing is not a matter of what matters to you and what your own confidence is in. It's not about yourself at all. And the other thing that Scheffler thinks is a lesson is that valuing is a matter of controlling time. It's an attempt to impose a standard on time to make it answerable to us. Let me illustrate this with an example. This was a realistic example about 3 years ago. Some of you may know about the dreamers. Young people who are undocumented and brought to this country at a very young age, and then who have grown up. During the Obama administration, dreamers were asked to register themselves with the federal government with a deal that the government was not going to deport them, incarcerate them on the basis of their undocumented status. And when the Trump administration took over, they unilaterally decided that they were no longer to afford dreamers that protection. There was a deal that was offered by the Trump administration and Congress to dreamers. The deal, at a certain point, had something of the following flavor. Current dreamers will receive protection from incarceration, deportation, and given a path to citizenship. And one of the things that they were asked to give up in return was that future dreamers will receive no such protection. The official justification the Trump administration gave was that they didn't want to incentivize people who are undocumented from bringing their children into the country. This was a deal that dreamers adamantly opposed. And as a result, they did not strike a deal with the Trump administration. Now, why did the dreamers oppose it? I think this is a good illustration of values, things that matter, that is not individualistic, and a matter of controlling time that Scheffler believes is a lesson from his 3 theses. The dreamers did not value that they, themselves, here and now, are protected and afforded the benefits from the Trump administration. They weren't thinking only about themselves, or even primarily about themselves. What they valued was that dreamers, through time, are protected. They wanted to impose this value on the future, to make the future answerable to this value. The fact that they were given protection was not an expression of their value. That wasn't the thing that mattered. The thing that mattered was something else, something that had to persist through time. Let's break with a discussion question. We've talked about values of ours that are individualistic and not future-directed in our discussion last time. Do you think these values are more or less important to you than values of yours that are non-individualistic and future-directed? It's a bit abstract. Here's one way to answer this question. If there were an evil figure who decided to hold one set of values hostage to trade for the other, which values are easy calls and which are close calls? The dreamers were faced with such a trade-off. How much do you value your own protection versus the protection of dreamers as such? One choice the Trump administration didn't give them was for them to lose their protections, but to give future dreamers protections. That would have been one way to trade off values that are individualistic with values that are not. There's a lot of possibilities that you can think about depending on what you value. Think about it, write about it. See you here in part 2. The second chapter of Scheffler's book contains a very interesting discussion of the personal afterlife as compared to the collective afterlife. The personal afterlife is defined as what we've been talking about in the last unit, survival of the death of your own body. Different religions have their own conceptions, whether it's reincarnation or heaven or other forms. And Scheffler wants to compare the values that we have that depend on our belief in the personal afterlife and the values that we have that depend on our belief in the collective afterlife, which is just the continuation of the human species after we're dead. If you look at all the world religions and belief systems about the personal afterlife, you can distill a lot of the reasons why people have these beliefs into a series of categories. The first is that having a personal afterlife alleviates the fear of death. If death was not inevitable, then there's less fear of it. You actually do survive. Secondly, the desire to be reunited with loved ones who have died before and after your own death seems to be very important to people. An afterlife that was guaranteed, but in which you were completely alone, is not attractive as a kind of belief system to many cultures and peoples. Cosmic vindication for injustices on Earth seems to be a crucial part of many belief systems. That part of the personal afterlife consists in judgments for things done on Earth that people have gotten away with, or rewards for things done on Earth that are not granted on Earth. There are many peoples who would find no motivation at all for the personal afterlife if there wasn't an element of justice in it. And finally, the personal afterlife seems to give purpose for activities done during life. When some cultures and peoples ask, what's the point of it all if we're going to eventually die anyways? Having a personal afterlife with a certain kind of moral character or vindication gives purpose for things done on Earth, especially if living is particularly harsh. Given all of these motivations for believing in the personal afterlife, something interesting happens when we compare it to the collective afterlife. Scheffler observes that people who believe in the personal afterlife, heaven or reincarnation or something of the kind, still react rather strongly to the doomsday scenario. What matters to them and what matters, period, seems to change, even if they do believe that they themselves will survive the death of their bodies and their loved ones in some way. Secondly, a lot of people begin life being confident in the personal afterlife, and then come to stop believing in it. Such people do go through some kind of crisis, but they still find meaningfulness in a lot of the activities that they do because of the collective afterlife. A rather religious cancer researcher who comes to believe that there is no heaven still finds it meaningful to pursue cancer research if they believed that people will be around to benefit from it. And finally, and I'm going to propose this here, one interesting choice for you to think about is, suppose that there is a personal afterlife, but you're not guaranteed it, and you're offered to have it in exchange for destroying the collective afterlife, the future of humanity. I think a great many people may very well choose that humanity continue even if I lose my personal afterlife. What does this say about values? And this, I think, is one of Scheffler's most important conclusions. These kinds of choices and these kinds of comparisons seems to reveal to him that it's more important to us that some unknown set of complete strangers survive than that we and our close loved ones survive. The future of humanity, even though it contains people that don't even exist yet, so we don't know them, is more important to us than even the personal survival of us after the death of our own bodies. The second conclusion, he thinks, is that leading a life of value, meaningfulness, significance, things that matter, depends on the existence of future generations of humans. And he thinks that this is opposite, contrary to how we've been thinking about the importance of future generations in our discussions of climate change and ecological disaster. The easiest argument that we hear all of the time in debates about global sustainability is that it's important for us to save the Earth for future generations because we are obliged to future generations. They depend on us to live and live well. If we destroy the planet, then what they're left with through no fault of their own, is a very bleak life, if they have life at all. Scheffler turns this completely around in his examination of the doomsday scenarios. He thinks that the meaningfulness of our lives depends on future generations, so that while they depend on us for their existence and well-being, we depend on them for our lives to matter. If we saw to it that there's no future to humanity, then we're seeing to it that our lives now will have no value. Valuing has, as a precondition, the existence of future people on Earth. Otherwise, the things that only seem to matter to us actually don't, and we're under the illusion that our activities have any kind of significance. That's the end of chapter 2 in Scheffler. And I leave you with this question. And I think it raises an important question. This will be optional. You're not required to write on it, but we will talk about it in class. Scheffler has gone a long way towards arguing that many of our values, in fact, our most important values, are non-individualistic and non-egoist. But now he's saying that our life mattering depends on future generations. And so if we want our lives to matter, we need to preserve future generations. And one question I've always had about this is, does that show that our interest in preserving and sustaining future generations is selfish and egoistic, or non-egoistic and non-individualistic? It's confusing to me. I could see it going one of two different ways. Think about it, maybe write about it, and let's talk about it in class.